Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Authors Love Bookstores, presented by A Mighty Blaze. I'm Joe Moldover, host of the novel Every Moment After, and I'm your host for today. Authors Love Bookstores is a weekly online program held on Wednesdays. I host and produce this program in conjunction with fellow writer Kimberly Hensel-Lorance. Our goal is to highlight indie bookstores across the US and Canada, to tell you what makes them so special, and what you can do to support their continued survival. If you're watching live with us on Facebook, please feel free to post a question via comment below the broadcast, and I'll get to as many as we can. Today, I am delighted to welcome Rachel Levy Lesser. Rachel is the author of Life's Accessories, a memoir and fashion guide. Her work has appeared in the Huffington Post, Glamour, Parenting, Modern Loss, Kveller, and several anthologies. She is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Michigan Business School. In her previous life as a marketing professional, she worked on the business side of Time Inc. on magazines including InStyle, People, and Real Simple. When not writing, Rachel can be found baking, and she hosts a baking show on A Mighty Blaze where she interviews cookbook authors and bakes along with them. More on that in a little bit. Practicing yoga, knitting scarves, and wearing them indoors. Rachel, thank you so much for being with us today.
Me, Joe. I'm happy to be here.
Also with us is Kathy Morrison of the Newtown Bookshop. Welcome, Kathy. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Let's dive right in. Rachel, we are here together because you selected the Newtown Bookshop is your favorite indie bookstore. And I am sure you visited many indies over the years. So can you tell us what makes this one so special?
I visited a lot of bookstores over the years. I always hit a bookstore back in the day when I used to travel to different cities. But I live in Newtown. So the Newtown Bookshop is my local bookshop. And I've been going to it for years and years and years. And I've also been writing for years and years and years. And from the time I can remember, whenever I reached out to Kathy at the bookshop about an event, she was always so excited to welcome me and other local author friends, I should say. There's a bunch of us. So Kathy's always been warm and welcoming. She's been so creative in the events she's had for us. I mean, I've done events with her for my most recent book, Life's Accessories. And I even did an event for Life's Accessories a year or two ago at Anthropologie in town, because there's a chapter on it about the women's fashion store Anthropologie, and Kathy was like, I'm going to be there and I'm going to sell the books from the bookstore. So she just did it all. She's done children's book events for me, and I've gone to events there for friends and for people I haven't known. I know she has a ton of book clubs there. I think a cookbook club. So that, as like an author, I would say Kathy and the whole team has always been supportive of me and so many different authors and creative. And also as a reader and a shopper there, whenever I go there, I find I always leave the store with more books than I thought I was going to buy, which is good, but with great recommendations. And there's just such a personal feel. And it's one of my favorite places to go in town.
I love it. That's great. Kathy, I would love for our viewers to find out a little bit more about your bookstore and about what makes it unique and special. So I was just going to ask you a couple of questions that we oftentimes have for booksellers.
Sure.
And Rachel mentioned events, and that is one of my favorite things to ask booksellers about, because events at independent bookstores can so often be interesting, unpredictable, unique, strange. And I wonder if you have an especially memorable live event or special live event or peculiar live event that you can remember that you'd like to share with us.
Well, we've had many, and they're all memorable in their own ways. However, one of the most memorable, I have to say, is we were lucky enough to have Henry Winkler come. And he was with his co-author, Lynn Oliver, and they were writing their children's books, Here's Hank. We had him at a school, one of the elementary schools, during the day, and then he was with us at the Newtown Theater that evening to a packed house, of course. And he was just so gracious, and everyone was so excited, and he just gave such a heartfelt message. he always had trouble in school and he had trouble reading. And he reiterated that, teachers called him dumb or that he wasn't good enough. And he just wanted to put the message out to the kids that there's always something that you're good at, regardless of if you have a weakness in a certain area. There's another area that you will excel. And you just have to find that and don't let anybody bring you down. And so since it was such a great message and everybody was so excited to see him just because he's Henry Winkler and the Fonz, it was just a fun day. So that was just one of many. We've also had, another author that is a big hit in Newtown is Lisa Scottolini, who lives on the other side of Philadelphia, and she writes suspense, and she will have a new historical fiction title out in a couple weeks, Eternal. But when we've had her, she is a stand-up comedian, literally. And so it's a lot of fun. All the ladies were laughing. Again, the Newtown Theater was packed, and we had a great day.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. Betty Jean in the audience says she loves Henry Winkler. Everybody loves Henry Winkler. He does great work around dyslexia, and he just seems like one of those people it's impossible not to love. That's great. Rachel also talks about always leaving with more books than she planned to, which is obviously your job as a bookseller. And one of the questions I always have is kind of, how does that happen? And in particular, how do you make good book recommendations? What is the art of making a good recommendation? What is the art of matching somebody up with the right book? What do you think are the ingredients to being able to do that really well?
Well, I have to say that I think the first thing is for us to listen to the people when they come in the store and ask questions and see where their interests are. The other thing is, and it's something that takes that's your one-time shot when somebody comes in, but something else, you develop relationships. And there's a lot of people that come in our store over and over again, and we know them by name, and they're always telling us, things that are happening in their lives, and they're asking us about ours. And we develop a relationship, and that relationship helps us sell to them, to know what they're interested in, what kind of family, do they have grandkids or kids or, an older mom that they like to buy books for. So, knowing all that, in addition to just asking questions specifically about a certain thing they might want in that particular time, is how we like to do our business. And I think that's how we're successful at it.
Mm-hmm. Got it. That's great. A fair number of the people who watch this program are themselves writers or aspiring writers. And one of the things that you've touched on is that your store has great relationships with some writers, like Rachel, like Lisa, and like Henry Winkler. But I think one of the questions we always think about is, when somebody is a rising writer, maybe a debut writer, and is trying to reach out and to make connections with bookstores, wants to build that relationship, wants to do events, and so forth. What advice do you have to give that person? And I always ask, because I know that this is a generative question, what are the things they should not do when trying to connect with bookstores?
Okay. I would say, first of all, you have to reach out to us, because we don't always know all the authors in the area, regardless of who you are. It's hard for us to actually know. So to be certain, I would always reach out to whichever bookstore in your area that you want to make sure that they know you're on their radar. And then be willing to work with them and make it a two-way street. So, with Rachel and myself, we support her books and she supports us. So it works both ways. And I would say for all authors to keep that in mind and find a way that they can support the bookshop, as well as ask, quite honestly, to have events there. And because we're more than willing to help anybody, push their craft ahead.
Yeah, that's great.
And the other thing, as far as mistakes, not too many. I would say one thing is we have had books come into the store that we're offering more on a consignment basis because it's a self-published book.
Yeah.
And we've had things where inside the book, they talk about Amazon.
Oh, no.
So I like that sort of thing. I don't know if I would put that in the book that you want to put in independent bookstores. Yeah,
that is very good advice. That is very good advice. Other booksellers have talked about making sure that as an author that, on your social media and on your website, that you're not sort of pushing Amazon right at the very top or sort of things like that. Good advice.
Speaking of that, it's just funny you said that, speaking of Amazon or independent bookstores. When my last book came out in the fall of 2019, I had so many friends, a lot locally, would message me when all these posts went up and stuff saying, I just bought it from the Newtown Bookshop. Who do you want me to buy it for? I'll get it from the Newtown Bookshop, because they know I have that relationship. They know the store. And even some people who may not yet know of the Newtown Bookshop, I will say, this is where to go. So like you said, Kathy, it does go both ways. But I appreciate as an author when people ask me, where's the best way to buy it? And I'm always happy to support a local independent bookstore.
And we love when you say that, Rachel.
I have a lot of people that tell me, I just talked to Kathy.
Oh yeah, I have a similar relationship with my local indie, which is Wellesley Books, and people always send me birthday presents from them and things like that. Rachel, I oftentimes ask writers about their writing life during COVID, whether they're able to be creative. That seems a little bit silly with you because we know that you are. You have a podcast, you have your book, you have your blog. You were just in the Zibby Owens anthology, so you are being productive. Tell us how you're doing it. Tell us what the obstacles are and how you're coping.
Because we're pretty much a year into the pandemic. And by the way, today's actually a Mighty Blaze's first birthday, and I made a cupcake from Magnolia Bakery, who was just on our baking show. So I had to throw that out there. But it's Blaze's birthday today, but I think this week and most likely this weekend, we're all going to be reflecting on what we were doing a year ago, right? And the world came to a stop so quickly. I was focused on my family and everyone's health and all that stuff. But I definitely, in the very beginning, felt like, what am I supposed to do? I had a book that came out in November 2019. I had traveled a lot for the book, but I had a lot of events planned for March, April, May. I was in New York City for a big event the very end of February thinking, should I be here? And then everything shut down. And there were a couple of weeks where I was a little frozen. And I actually remember, I think to get me unfrozen, I wrote an essay for Kveller about how I think, it's so funny to think back that I thought this a year ago, I think this is a great opportunity for us all to get really creative. And, some of the greatest works of fiction were written during the Black Plague and all this stuff, which looking back on it, I'm like, what was I thinking? Who, giving that advice to other people. And when at the same time, I was just trying to make myself, do some work and be more creative. But over time, I definitely have written a lot. I mean, I've written a lot of essays. I wrote for Zibby Owens' book, Moms Don't Have Time to Read, which was really fun. I started working with The Blaze, with you guys, and doing a baking show where I interview cookbook authors. And since then, I've written a lot of essays. I actually started working on a book last fall, and I haven't gotten back to that, but now I'm working on a new book. Totally unrelated. It's actually about baking. It's hopefully like a recipe book related to stories behind it. And I feel like I have the bandwidth now to create a book like that versus the other one, which I was working on, which I can't seem to find the time to wrap my head around it. But it's okay because I'm creatively very busy, and that makes me feel really good. And I obviously feel very lucky that I'm able to work like this, that I can work from home, that my family's safe, and that there's been awesome organizations like the Mighty Blaze. There's awesome bookstores like the Newtown Bookshop that have moved a lot of events virtually. that I've been able to connect with a lot of people virtually, that you can still go into the Newtown Bookshop with a mask on and see people. So I guess that's a long-winded answer of saying I have been able to write and to be creative, but I was definitely a year ago like stunted. And obviously I still have my days like everybody else.
Tell us about your reading life. Are there books that you'd sort of recommend to our audience that have been meaningful to you or that have been sustaining to you during this time?
Again, similar to writing in the beginning, and I hear a lot of people say this, I couldn't finish a book. Like I just didn't have the focus. I'm talking about last March, but probably over the summer, I definitely got to reading. Obviously, I read Zibby's entire book, all the essays in it, Moms Don't Have Time To, which is great. It's also really great because, it's just like you can read 1 or 2 essays at a time. I have my whole stack here. I recently finished, and I bought this at the Newtown Bookshop, The Kindest Lie by Nancy Johnson, fellow Blazer, and I just loved it, and I can't stop thinking about it. And it was one of those books, when I finished it, I sat with it for a while. So that was good. I read The Vanishing Half. Are you showing all this? Which I know was a popular one. This is a really fun one too. Nobody Will Tell You This But Me by Bess Kalb, which is, it's great. I love memoir. And last, this was, I bought sort of in the beginning, right before the world shut down, but then I read it then. And she's, has a Philadelphia-based story, Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. This was great too. Those are just some of them. So, I mean, I've read a bunch of others. So I am back into my reading groove too. I know everyone else is into their Netflix binging mode, and I feel the pressure to like watch what everybody else is watching, but I'm still reading.
Well, there's an audience. Somebody in the audience has a question about your essay in the anthology, I guess in the Zibby Owens anthology. Can you give it a plug? Can you give us sort of the elevator pitch for your essay?
I actually had 2 essays in the book. One is a little more relevant to what we're talking about, and it's funny that I wrote it. It's called Wait, Did I Kill My Book Club? And I was in a book club for years and years and years in Newtown with friends of mine. Some of them I knew before, some of them I met through the book club. It was a great group it was all women. They always supported me in all my events and everything. And I mean, we must have done it for 5 or 6 or 7 years. And I'm such a joiner and a pleaser, and I want to show up and do all my homework. But it got to the point a few years ago, I think it was like 2015 or 16, where I was like, felt like I was getting these assignments in high school, and I was not interested in some of the books that were being assigned to me. And one day I was like, why am I doing this? And so I quit the book club, and I sent an email to the group saying I quit, and with like no explanation. They thought there was something wrong with me. And then I just explained, I really just don't have time for this anymore. And then the book club died. Like nobody ever went again. So the joke became, I'm still friends with these people, that I killed it. So, every time the book, it's sort of like a sore subject, but the more serious part of the book, of the essay, and it came under the heading of Moms Don't Have Time to Read, was that, it's kind of about just like taking over your own agency. And I want to read what I want to read. I'm probably reading more now that I'm not in a book club. Sometimes I start a book and I don't finish it. Sometimes I just listen to a podcast about it. Sometimes I listen to an audiobook. And the other essay was called Breaking Up with My Kids, which is about, as a mom of teenagers, especially over the last year, sometimes I break up with my kids in my head. They don't know that I break up with them. But it started out because this was right before the pandemic. I was watching my son at his high school basketball game, and he was on the bench the whole time. And I couldn't even look at him because I was like so upset for him that he wasn't playing. And so I just had to disassociate myself from him. So it's about doing that sometimes. And I think that's pretty good advice for parents.
It's so good. It's fabulous. I love that.
Can I jump in there for a second?
Please.
Rachel's book, by the way, it's right here at Life's Accessories. Rachel writes with a lot of humor. And what she is so good at doing is that you'll be smiling or laughing in one of the essays in the book, and then she'll say something else, and you'll turn on a dime, and you'll have a little tear in your eye because she just said something so heartwarming. So I want to commend you, Rachel, for the way you write. It's very David Sedaris-like.
Look at you! Look at you hand selling right here live on air.
I have to say, I did my launch event for Life's Accessories, the very first event locally at the Newtown Bookshop, and we had a huge crowd. It was great, and in the front row, it was everyone in my family. It was my dad and my aunts and uncles, and it was all the gray-haired people. We said, and a big part of the book is about losing my mom early, and so I have a great picture of all of us. And I'm in the front row with them holding up the book. And I read an essay about my dad, how he became my mom when I wasn't looking. And that was just a really memorable night. So, yeah, thanks for saying that.
I love that. I love that. Kathy, keep it going. Sell us some more books. I mean, I think it goes without saying that people in the audience should be picking up a copy of Rachel's book. It's funny. It's moving. You can eat it if in smaller bites if you have a limited attention span during COVID. And in the chat, we're going to have a link for the audience for how you can get it from Newtown Bookshop, which is where you should be getting it. Tell people what else to buy.
Well, one of the things is during this past year, people have been coming in, and I think what people are trying to do right now is I think they're trying to escape. And it doesn't always have to be escape to a wonderful, great place, but just an escape from, we just went through a year with the pandemic. We just went through a very political, an election that really was hard on people, that people were taking different sides. So people wanted to get away from the news. So first of all, one of the things that I read recently that I really enjoyed it's called The Star-Crossed Sisters of Tuscany by Lori Nilsson Spielman. And that book is about an Italian family living in New York, and there is a curse in their family that every second-born daughter will never find love. And so one of the aunts, the older aunt, decides that she is going to take some of the younger nieces to Tuscany, and they go on a trip to try to break the curse. They're all second-born daughters, but it's a book about travel and fun. And when we can't travel now, we can go, through the book to Tuscany and have all these wonderful foods. There's so many books. One of the books on my list is Such a Fun Age that Rachel just talked about. It's Philadelphia based, and it has a racial slant to it, but it's a wonderfully written book by a debut author. And there's another book in Philadelphia called Long Bright River by Liz Moore, who takes place in Kensington, which Kensington is a spot in Philadelphia where there's a lot of drug addicts. And this book is about two sisters, an addict and a police officer. And the police officer's beat is the Kensington area. And the sister, who is the addict, goes missing in that area. And the police officer has to figure out what's going on. So these are some of the books that we're recommending. There's plenty other ones. And we're just thrilled to put books in people's hands so that they can go home and, like I said, to have a distraction and escape.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And people in the chat are talking about how much they miss traveling, which I think we all do. So second best is going to be reading about it. Rachel, I believe that you are a fellow musical theater fan. If I'm remembering that correctly from your blog, am I getting that right?
When you said musical theater, I was like, because I think I'm tone deaf and I can't sing and I don't have a musical bone in my body, but I'm a huge musical theater fan. And I wrote an essay once. I mean, I've written a lot about it, but I wrote an essay that's coming to mind right now for Modern Loss about how I was a huge Broadway fan. And I went to practically every show with my mom from the time I was a little girl. And then she died when I was in my late 20s. And the theater went dark for me. I don't think I went for 10 years. And then I went back. And the first show that I saw, was beautiful. And since then, I wrote about how beautiful is about a lot of things. It's about heartache, but for me, I felt like my mom was there with me in the theater. And since that time, I have kids of my own now. Pre-pandemic, I took them to the theater all the time, and that's one of the things I really miss, and I can't wait to get back to. Yeah,
that is why I bring it up. So I was remembering that essay. It's a beautiful essay, and you talked about kind of looking in how you used to look in the playbill and sort of see all of how many shows you had seen. It's a wonderful essay, and theater is one of the things that I really miss as well. I wonder if either one of you, in the same way that there are some books that capture the magic of travel when we're not able to travel, if either one of you think of any books that sort of capture that magic of theater, whether it's sort of musical theater or theatrical production, or sort of books that you think of as especially wonderful theater books. Or if I stumped you both.
Yeah, you might have stumped us.
Yeah. For me, I mean, just one of the books I talked about, it's not necessarily about theater, but it's Nobody Will Tell You This by Me by Beth Calvin. It's written by a young woman who's very funny. She, I think, is a writer for one of the comedy shows, and I'm blanking on which one it is right now out in California. But this was a book about the women in her family related to mine, what I wrote about. And she writes in the voice of her grandmother through much of it. It's a memoir told about somebody through the person's voice who's no longer with us. And there is a theatrical piece to that, right? You're reading it in someone else's voice. Right. So that just reminded me, I mean, yes and no, that was the first book that came to mind that I've read most recently, for sure.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love that. Kathy, we're going to start to run a little bit low on time, but I do have a question that I wanted to ask you. And this is something that we ask almost all of the bookstore folks who come on the program. And the question is this: running a successful bookstore is part hard work, part luck, and part what else?
Okay. I'd like to give it a 3 answer to that one. Number one, I would not be successful without my staff in the bookshop. They are very knowledgeable. They're reading all the time. And all of us together, we work as a team in that we can, tell each other about books. And when one person doesn't know something about this book, there's usually somebody else who does. So together we make a much better bookseller than just one of us. And they are wonderful, and they man the store, and I could not do it without them. The second thing is our community. Our community in Newtown has supported us through thick and thin. And this past year, when it hasn't been the most pleasant time for us to exist, they really stood behind us and supported us. And we had a great holiday season. I was just shocked at how good it was after a year that wasn't so wonderful. And the third thing is that when I think it's 9 years now, when I decided that I was going to try to buy the bookshop and take over a bookshop that was going to go out of business, is I turned to my family, my husband and my 2 kids. My kids at that time, one was starting college, one was in high school. And I said to, first of all, my kids, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Now, they grew up going there, so they really loved it. But they both just gave me words of support. And when I turned to my husband, and Tom, and I said, what do you think about this? And he just supported me right away, didn't even blink. He just said, you got to do this. You should do it. So I think all that support is what that takes us to be successful, in addition to what you already said at the beginning.
I want to ask you a little bit more about that. So, I mean, so many people have the fantasy of buying their local independent bookstore or working their local independent bookstore. You actually did it. Can you say a few more words about your origin story in terms of what you had been doing and then how that went down?
Well, I'll go back a long way. In college, I was a math major.
Okay.
So really totally different. And after college, I was a computer programmer and software designer.
Okay.
So totally different.
Yeah.
And then things happened and I had kids and you just evolve from that. And I never kept up with the computer side of things. So I found myself, in my 40s being a dinosaur of a career that I had before. I didn't know, I just wasn't kept up to date. So I decided one day when my kids were in high school that I just went to the bookshop and I asked them for a job and they had one. So I became a bookseller there for a couple of years and I loved it. It was part-time. I could go there. I could talk about books and I got to read a lot and I got to see people. And unfortunately, the previous owner, her lease was done and she decided not to renew the lease for the store and she was going to sell it. So that's when it took me a while to think about it, like in my own head. But once I verbalized it to my family, they were beyond supportive. And that's when we just jumped into it. And I had a lot of learning to do. I mean, I knew a little from working for the previous owner, but I learned a whole heck of a lot in those first few years.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. It's something that people dream of doing, but you actually did it. Talk to us about how we can support the bookstore now. I think you are open for browsing. Is that right?
Yes, we're open. We try to limit it to, 8 customers in the store. But we are open and we're always open online, newtownbookshop.com. So you can support us there as well as in the store. We will do curbside if you want to call us and have us put something aside. We'll just bring it to your car if you're not comfortable coming in, or we can actually ship it to your house too. So there's all different ways we're here. We're available online, on the phone, in person. We're doing whatever we can do to make it work. And we do take precautions in the store. We're always masked and we're wiping down surfaces. So we're being as safe as we can be.
And do I remember? Do you have online book clubs right now? Is that something I saw?
So we have 2 book clubs a month, regular book clubs, and we're doing them virtually through Zoom. We do have, and maybe Rachel can help us out when we get back to more normal. We do have a cookbook club that we have not done since COVID occurred. And what that was that we pick a cookbook. The members then pick a recipe out of that cookbook. They cook it at home. They bring it to the store. We put out a table. We have a huge potluck meal. And then everyone gets to talk about about their recipe that they made. And then we get to share and eat and have fun.
That sounds so good, although I think you've got to be careful about letting Rachel in. She has a reputation for killing book clubs. So
that's what I was going to say. In fact, after I killed the book club, my friends and I were at the store once for an event by another author, and we learned about your cookbook club, and my friend was like, we should do that. And we never did. But we could incorporate that into the baking show somehow.
It's fabulous.
That'd be fun.
My book club is still rolling, but the secret is that it's a book and whiskey club. So like that combination kind of helps it to roll along. That it's such a complete pleasure to speak to the two of you. A reminder to the audience, go to newtownbookshop.com for all of your book buying needs, especially to keep up with pick up Rachel's work. RachelLevyLesser.com to access all of Rachel's posts, her events, her work, her essays, to keep up to date on her forthcoming work. Thank you both so much for being with me. It's just been a pleasure to speak with both of you today.
Thank you.
And And to our audience, thank you for being here with us, newtownbookshop.com. Come back next week. And a special happy birthday to a Mighty Blaze. Thank you. Custom-made cupcake from Rachel. Happy birthday. I won't sing. I'll spare all of you. But to the audience, we'll see you next week. Until then, be safe and keep reading.